pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
As a way of respecting, honoring, and creating awareness about our past, we begin our village board meetings by acknowledging that New Paltz is on the ancestral land of the Munsee, Esopus, and Lenape people.
I don't believe we have anything to change regarding this agenda. Oh no, that's incorrect. We have a few things to add to the consent agenda, right, Ari?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have an item regarding records destruction authorization. We will add to the consent agenda. And we would also like to purchase a thermometer for Village Hall. And a fifth item on the consent agenda is to accept Eunice Ward's resignation from the Landlord-Tenant Relations Council. I have a motion to accept the consent agenda as amended.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And I'd like to move that we're accepting the business agenda as is.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Did we receive any, or do we want to make any announcements?
I have two. One is based on a couple complaints from some tenants or, pleas for help regarding security deposits. And so after looking into it a little bit, it turns out, if you had signed your lease, way before New York State updated their security deposit return law, which is, on the books, it's been in effect as of July 14th, 2019, you might not be protected by that law, but I want to remind everyone that that's why we still have the village security deposit return law on the books. We're taking that on shortly, but part of the reason I wanted to take, my time with like looking at that part of the law was so it would still protect people that kind of are in that weird limbo bit. So if you're one of those folks who didn't reach out to me, but you're kind of having issues and your landlord's deferring to very antiquated vaguenesses, because that's what the law used to be, like reasonable amount of time, which is generally 30 days. That's not true if you're in the village of New Paltz, and it's 21 days. So you're still protected, even if not by the current state law. And then the next announcement is just a reminder about the census. There's 54 days to self-respond now. So, the clock is running, so you can do it anytime online, over the phone. If you have questions, you can reach out to any of us. We can send you the link, help you through it. You fill it out for your household that you were a part of as of April 1st, 2020.
Hey, Alex, do you have any statistics yet on how we've been doing in terms of responses on the census?
I will soon. I have a lot of questions about the statistics that I've seen so far, because they cover the whole map of 12561, kind of put all three of our census tracts into one. But as a whole, New Paltz is actually on the right track. I just don't know about village track specifically.
Okay. How often is that updated?
So daily, the map on the census website that anyone can check out is updated every day at 3 p.m. But that information does not break out the two tracks that are the village. One of those tracks, of course, is campus, and the other is like the rest of the village. So it's just funny data to look at, and looking at historic data. We can't rely on how all of New Paltz is doing for a good picture of how the village of New Paltz is doing.
I see. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I suggest that I think both of those things we should do a website posting about. I think we did a census reminder, so we could just take that off the shelf and put that in. But I hadn't even thought about that issue, the overlap, and that our local law would protect people until the new one kicks in. I didn't think of that until you just said it. So
Oh.
I think we need to try to disseminate that more, especially now because a lot of leases were June 1st, but obviously this is a different kind of year, but still.
Yeah,
So.
I had emailed it out to everybody who had submitted complaints and whatnot. I agree. We should do some more posts. So I'll work on the words and whatnot. But it's come up with a lot of people who had questions. So I think as much as we can get that out there would actually be really great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, did we receive any public comments, Ariana? Any on the YouTube link?
Nope. We have not received any, and I'm watching it, so I'll let you guys know.
Okay. So we have Pat Pomeroy with us, but before we jump into Pat telling us a bit more about the Drinking Water Source Protection Program, do we want to share any thoughts, comments about the climate discussion items?
Well, wouldn't this next conversation sort of do that?
Yeah, totally. Plus the local water sourcing.
Sounds good.
I don't know.
All
I'll
right.
have to look at the chips. I think road improvements, depending on how you do it, have an impact.
Well, yeah, we can talk about plans for the road.
Right.
Yeah, it'd be great if we had more. And I was thinking about doing this when we redo some of those roads. Could we include marking that make it clear that bicycles should be in certain areas? You know, just like identifying bike paths on some of those streets. That might be a nice upgrade.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed.
Okay, so Pat, tell us about the program that we've.
Thank you. I just wanted to, since it's fresh in my mind, and I'm getting to be older and forgetful, on the roads, it could be something that would fulfill some of your chip requirements, and also some of the MS4 requirements. If you put signs on the road too that said you are in the source or the watershed of, and identify the watershed that you have, which would help you with that. Also with stormwater matters too, with respect to your MS4s. So let me tell you about my program and tell you what a next step would be. I sent you a one pager from the DEC. This is a new program, and that's the regional councils around the state of New York were each asked to pick a community in their region. So in the 7 counties that I serve, Hudson Valley Regional Council, which are Spud Row, Sullivan, Putnam, Ulster, Dutchess, Rockland, Orange, and Westchester, we have asked the DEC how they felt about us working with New Paltz. When this happened, you had just discovered the problem that you have with your reservoir and the contamination of the reservoir at that point. So I should start out by saying that I know going into this and that you are working with the DEC, that you work with New York City DEP, that you work with the Department of Health, that you've been working with Steve Linkley from Rural Water, that you also work with Russell Urban Mead from Chazen in the past, and you've worked with Nui Pick, who is now cooperating with the Department of Health on source water. The program that we're talking about will not interrupt or interfere with any of your current work or the past work that you've done. That will help us build a better product. So this is part of a 604B water quality planning grant that the regional councils around the country receive through the EPA Clean Water Act. And it's also governed in our state by the New York State DEC. And they put together a scope of work for the next several years of this grant program. And the scope of work that they've asked me and other regional councils to provide is to work with them on source water protection plans helping municipalities build their own source water protection plan. They didn't want it to be a top-down project. They wanted it to be something that the community themselves could meet and decide what's best for them. And my job is to facilitate this. This part of the program has no cost to you. The team that I put together to help me work with the Village of New Paltz will be covered out of my grant, so that anybody that's giving us assistance through the meetings, et cetera, will be not something that you're financially responsible for. So this is planning for the future and assessing the realities and also IDing your vulnerabilities into the future. The state is also going to be doing some communities on their own with the same program. The one pager I sent you has a link to a guidance of a framework for this program. The framework is a draft. And one of the items that'll be important as we walk through this project, which will take us a year, monthly meetings, it's a lot of presentations and different meetings that we'll be conducting, will be to let the state know how their draft framework is working and what needs to be changed. The framework will not be changed until we're all finished with this project, but we're going to have the opportunity to make input based on how you felt this program worked, how you felt this facilitation worked, what you think could be done better, what you did not like about the draft framework. So the Village of New Paltz is kind of a regional guinea pig, for lack of a better word, but you'll end up with a source water protection plan that'll be generated by the people in your community. There's 2 steps that we need to take. The first step is that I would need to have the approval of the village board to move forward. A commitment from the village that you understand what we're going to do. We'll set forth a definite outline and the scope of work so you can see what the plan is following the draft framework that they've provided us. And the second task, which we should be thinking about if you agree to this tonight, would be to establish a stakeholder group. And the stakeholder group is going to be the group that's going to work with the team, my Hudson Valley Regional Council team, and I, to meet regularly and start to develop this plan. So off the top of my head, knowing New Paltz slightly, I thought, it shouldn't be too large, but I would think that you would need to have someone from SUNY New Paltz on there as one of your largest water users. Also, maybe the Meadow Pond Housing Complex. Somebody from the chamber and the business community, someone from your agricultural industry, because I think that they are important in and around the New Paltz area. Somebody from your tourism industry, perhaps a student, either high school or college. But the stakeholder group is up to you. I don't know your community well enough to be able to tell you who to put on the stakeholder group. But I will tell you who's on my team. So I've put together a team of people from the region to help me do this. And we're going to be learning also, because after we've done it for New Paltz, we're going to go and do it other places and offer this facilitation. The state has put together a team of experts, and you already know many of them, to assist all the communities in the state in doing this project. So the DOH, the DEC, NUIPIC, Rural Water, and the state hired 2 engineering consultants, the Chazen Group and Barton and the Judas. My team is Peter Fairweather, who is a Village of New Paltz resident and a municipal planner. Peter has worked with Hudson Valley Regional Council for a long time, does our comprehensive economic development strategy, and Peter will be helping us to put together the plan and getting the plan ready with your stakeholder group. My team is also Russell Urban Mead. So I know you've used Russell before, but the work that he does for this particular project, the hydrology part and the science part, will come out of my pocket and not interfere with the work that he's doing with you. So it'll be a bookkeeping matter for him. I liked him because he had a strong knowledge of the reality of the water supply for the village of New Paltz, and that he understood exactly what you have been looking for as far as alternate water sources and protecting yourself into the future. Also, Pace University Land Use Law Center. Pace is going to be working with us to develop a series of training webinars, training modules to be able to help stakeholder groups. And our meetings are going to be open to the public, so it would be helping educate people in the public who come in from your community on source water protection, and doing a little history about the source water protection plans that were done back in the early 1999, but also looking at land use law and what you can and cannot do as you go through this process, and what you should be aware of to protect your water into the future. So they'll be coming in with a series of educational programs. We're going to look for some GIS technology helping us putting all the mapping together. That'll be part of this plan. This could be an addendum to your comprehensive master plan. And I would think that the timeline on this is going to be a year from when we get the first stakeholder group meeting. Throughout this process, the DEC has asked that I report to them on every single thing I do so that they are able to see what exactly works, what doesn't work. If you would look, I'd ask you to please open the link on the framework and look at it. It's 160 pages long. So, it takes us from the stakeholder meeting to the very end. So it's, if you can't sleep one night, pick it up and look at it. But that's what we're going to be working on. It's, there's a structure here that I've been asked to follow. And I will, the expenses for this part of it for your community are covered. I don't know that that's going to happen with other communities, but for your community, for this part of the project, it is covered under my grant for this year. Questions?
Yeah, Pat, I have a few questions. So I'll list them. So will Russell be serving on your team as himself or as a person from Chazen? That's question one. Okay, I'm sorry.
I just lost you, sorry. I had picked him before I realized that Chazen was a contractor for the state. And so I asked the state if they thought it was any conflict, and they indicated no. If you would prefer, based on your experience with Russell, that you would like to keep Russell out of this team and on the side, I'll find another engineer hydrologist to work with me.
Personally, I think it would be great to have
Okay.
Russell on the team.
Okay.
But I was just also wondering, would we have Russell on the team plus another person from Chazen? That was the only reason I was asking.
No, my team is going to be small. I have to pay them out of my grant fund. So
got it. So you'll have one person from Barton and Judas, and then Russell.
No. I won't even have a member from Barton and Judas. The state has these people as people that we can contact if we need help. So if we get to a point where we need some more assistance, we can ask the state's contractor, which is Barton and Judas, and that to help us. But on my team, the Hudson Valley Regional Council team, Russell will be working strictly as Russell Urban Mead on a project involving the village of New Paltz, for which he has experience.
Got it. Okay. And then my other question is, how many individuals do you suggest we have on our stakeholder team?
Well, I think you'd probably want to have somebody from the town board or the village board there too, or maybe just want to pop in and do meetings. Maybe just want to have it all. I'm thinking that smaller works better, and I would think less than 10 would be a good number. Not everybody can come to meetings all the time. Not everybody's going to participate all the time, but this should give you the flexibility to have a good cross section of your community. You think? So
it's a 1-year commitment. How often?
I think we're going to
suggest we meet?
We meet monthly. Do you have a conservation advisory council in New Paltz? Because if you had a CAC, that would be someone else that you could put on there. I think probably once a month. And if we're not
once
a month commitment, and it I would like to see us move forward and have it done in a year. And if we need to have a little more time, people would agree that they have that commitment. And since we're going to do a lot of this electronically for a while anyway, our new normal, some of your residents who maybe winter someplace else can still participate because they could just log in on the phone. So.
Got it. Okay. Well, I think what we should do as a board is we'll put our heads together and identify who we want.
Okay.
We can do that separately and
Yeah.
let you know at an upcoming meeting.
Okay.
But this helps us understand how your team will work or who will be on your team. And then we'll I think your suggestions make a great deal of sense by having a business community person, a tourism person, a student, ag person. We'll find the right people.
Yeah, I figured you would. I just wanted to, say diversity is, really important, and diversity not only in what they do, but also in what they look like. Be aware of our current situation, and your population is diverse in the village of New Paltz, so let's have good representation of the population. So
yeah, that's a great suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then you said that we also need to motion as a board that we want to officially participate.
Yes. I looked at another community and went to another community in my region first. You were second place. And they had some baggage on some dealings that they had with the DEC. And they were not very thinking of cooperating very well. So it doesn't, I didn't want to waste months and months of time dealing with things that happened a long time ago that I have no control over to deliver a program and arguing, and defending this. The DC is not coming in and giving you an unfunded mandate. The DC is asking you, your community, to develop a plan to protect water into the future. And they're giving you some tools to help do it. So, but we need a commitment from you that says you understand what we're doing. You've looked at the framework. If you want, I have some people in the DEC that you can speak with. I can send you some contact names for you to speak in the central office with Sue Van Patten, who's in charge of the program. You could also speak with Steve Winkley from Rural Water, because I know he's been in the village working with you. Also, I'm trying to remember the guy's name from the Department of Health, because I know he's been in the village working with you also. And they're both familiar with the program. We just had a big phone call for the state's team. And the state's team is Rural Water, Department of Health, Nui Pick, Bartlett and Judas, Chazen, and they have someone else that they're going to put on. They haven't completely finished. And they haven't started their municipalities yet. They put the word out. They got 60 municipalities that wanted to work with them. There were bigger units. One of the units that they're thinking about taking is the Hudson 7, which of course impacts Ulster County, but that's a big water user group, involves using the Hudson River water. So that's a tough source to protect. So the state hasn't started that yet either. So we're gonna be doing ours before the state starts with their work. So we're all on a learning curve.
Right. So I think we, whether a year or two, we already applied to participate via the state program. So
Right.
we've already expressed interest officially that we would love to participate.
Perfect.
So I think we're just lucky now that that you've identified us as a community. So I'm very comfortable with the idea of motioning that our board officially signs on and participates with you, and then leave it up to us, and we'll populate our local stakeholder group and tell you who those folks are.
That's fine. And then I will, anytime I report back to the Department of State, I'll copy you, Mayor, and then you can just have a file for it so you can see exactly what I'm reporting back, that you made a motion today to cooperate and participate, and you're going to be forming the stakeholder group and letting me know who's going to be on that. Okay. Perfect.
Fantastic. Does anyone want to second my motion?
Good.
All in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
Aye.
Thank you so much. This is incredible.
Okay.
Gift.
It'll be fun to watch it happen and come, through
Well,
it.
we'll see.
Well,
It will definitely be fun. Why did you pick New Paltz?
Well, first of all, I like New Paltz, so I very often come over the gunks for meetings at the DC in Region 3, and I love that ride from Sullivan County over the mountains here. And you know, I had 8 years as a town supervisor and had a lot of water experience, but mine's a lot of stormwater stuff. So the water part is important to me. And I also did a comprehensive master plan, and we did some, we converted from open water sources to wells during my term. And we did some overlays, protection overlays around the wellheads to limit what could possibly contaminate our well. So I have some familiarity with what, you know, governments do to protect the water for everybody. And I also had some familiarity with the pushback that you get from some people when you try to do that. So,
Well,
Urban League, we were just talking about
Who
you.
it is.
yeah.
Hi, Pat. Hello, Tim.
Hi, Russell. Pat, you're welcome to hang out, and if you don't have to run to your next thing. This might be a great intro just in terms of what we've been doing locally. We've been working on a project to source more local water through a series of groundwater wells. We've been using Chazen and Russell as our hydrogeologist. So we have a couple of proposals on the table to move a couple of these well projects forward. And that's why we have Russell here this night, tonight. So it's a complete coincidence that you brought up his name 5 minutes ago, because we're working with him on a different but definitely related project.
Great, thank you.
So did the village board want to ask any other questions or share any thoughts with Pat before we move on to our next topic?
No, KT asked my question. Thank you.
So then let's jump in to this conversation with Russell. So we have two proposals from you, Russell, and I'll just briefly describe what they are. One of them is to do survey work regarding the area that we're referring to as well number 7 next to our water treatment plant property, which is on Mohonk Preserve property. And then the other proposal has to do with the alienation process on 2 wells that are on property that's shared by the town and village of New Paltz and Moriello Pool Park. So those are on the northern section of that pool park area. And we've done a couple of pump tests and quality tests at the Morello Pool Park wells. So the thinking is to then officially include those in the municipally owned property, which is to the north. We would have to pursue alienation, which would require an act of the state legislature. So the thinking is that it would be great to have Chazen walk us through that process. So it's really those 2 proposals are on the table for our village board to consider this evening. But why don't you give us a little bit more summary, Russell, and then the board can jump in with some extra questions.
Sure, thanks, Tim. You already gave a good summary. It's also true that while you were talking, my screen froze and I couldn't hear you for parts of what you said. So we'll see how this goes. We have worked, I think, for a longer period of time with you looking for new sources that are in association with the reservoir property. And well 5 is a wonderful well with a lot of long-term yield capacity opportunity for the village. And after much discussion, which you take much credit for, with Mohonk Preserve, the easiest resolution to satisfying health department requirements for 100 foot of ownership and 200 feet of control around public water system wells is the transfer of somewhere between 2 and 3 acres of Mohonk Preserve land to the village, so that the land around well 7 would be yours. And I am in fact not quite sure, and it doesn't matter to me right now, but you'll need to resolve whether it's owned by the village or the town or whatnot, given the, that the reservoir property is, as I understand it, owned by the town. But there are three things, as we understand it, that need to happen to affect that property transfer. One is typically when anybody acquires a piece of property and they're more than a residential parcel owner, they do a phase 1 site assessment to just check the box on environmental liability. Your attorney may advise you that in this case, that's being overly cautious, given that you think you know everything about the Mohonk Preserve land. I just don't know. So we gave you a task for environmental site assessment. If it was any other kind of a set of entities affecting a transfer like this, you would do that. Your attorney might advise you that it's not necessary. The second task is, so what is the new boundary? And so there's a survey task. That's the second task in that proposal. And that task will follow down the side of the property line and then find, determine how to cut out into Mohonk Preserve and create a box around well 7 that is sort of the minimum box size that that gives you 200 foot of ownership around that well. And then the third component of that task would be to stake the corners so that, because right now it's fairly obvious where the boundary is. There's an old stone wall. And once you depart from that stone wall, I think both Mohonk Preserve and you might appreciate knowing where the corners are. So those three pieces are incorporated in the common budget for task 2. And then task 3 is you would have your liability under control. You will have done the appraisal, which I understand you discussed at a prior meeting. You'll make your deal with Mohonk Preserve. You then need to take that lot line change through the parcel lot change process in the town of New Paltz. And we've checked with the town and it qualifies as a minor subdivision project, and that task basically takes you through that process so that in the end there's a lot line change filed with the county, and future people who will look at parcel boundaries in Ulster County will see that the boundary line has now got a jog in it that goes around well 7. So those are the three components of the proposal that we gave you for the reservoir property. Why don't I stop for a minute in case there are questions before I switch over to Moriello?
Hey, Tim, maybe you could refresh my memory, and Russell. We've tested this property, and what were the test results, or close to what the test results were?
I will admit that I don't have that on my top of memory.
So we've done 72-hour pump tests and quality tests at well 1, at well 5, at well 6,
and 7.
And 7. This is well 7.
I want to say something in the order of 40 to 50 gallons a minute was the yield.
Yeah, of all of the wells that we anticipate putting online, this was the best performer. I mean, they were all, very high quality performers, and the quality test came back, favorably. But this was probably the most appealing of all of them. So that's, I think, very important to note.
Yeah, I sort of remember that figure as well. I was just, that was part of the motivation for moving forward with this.
That's
right.
Correct.
And then, so Russell brought up the fact that at our last meeting, we went ahead and approved hiring Hubble, the appraisal firm. That was the firm that the Mohonk Preserve wanted us to use to value this area, that may end up being between 2.5 or 3.5 acres. We'll know once it's staked out. We're going to try to buy as little property from the Mohonk Preserve as possible. We just want to make sure that we have the required amount per the Department of Health. But we went ahead and approved spending $1,500 to have Andrew Ward from Hubble perform this appraisal. But what we want to do is to have the survey work done beforehand so that we can then hand the survey to Andrew Ward from Hubble and say, appraise exactly this area, as opposed to appraising in an area that may be plus or minus X number of square feet. You know, we don't want to have to go back later and say, well, we got an appraisal for 3 acres, but we need to buy 3.5. We want to know exactly the amount of space that we look to acquire, so then we can provide the survey and the appraised value of that surveyed area to the Mohonk Preserve and make them an offer to purchase this property. So I think that's it as far as this test well 7. And then Russell, why don't you go ahead and walk us through, unless there are any other questions, walk us through the other 2 test wells at the Moriello Pool property. And the reason that we have to pursue this alienation thing is that many, many years ago, New Paltz received some funding from New York State. So this parkland is considered official state parkland. And New York State has very strict rules about not having utilities on state parkland. So we actually have to remove it from the state park and then connect it to the contiguous area where the community center property is, which is not state parkland. So I'll let you explain further, Russell.
Well, you've delved into it more than I have, in fact, and I turned to my colleague Chris Round in our planning group at Chazen to put this task proposal together. But both he and you referred to an OPRHP Parks guidance document that says these are the steps you have to go through. And there's a form that was requested by your state senators, attorneys, saying that, I need the following documentation of this project so that we can move it through the legislative process. And Chris Round is very familiar with that form. And there it is not dissimilar from a seeker form. It basically asks a series of questions about purpose and alternative options and impact. We're happy to help complete that form. There are certainly some questions that we will need assistance with, precisely to the point that Tim just raised. What was the federal involvement previously, and set those kinds of questions so that there's just clarity and communication. And then that form, and we're happy to fill it out 2 ways: one that was suitable for seeker and one that's suitable for this alienation submission. We're assisting you in moving the process forward. So I think that's the simplest summary of what the proposal is to do.
Good stuff. Any questions from the village board? So I'd like to go ahead and motion that we approve both proposals from Chazen to do to take next steps on each of these projects.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No, I guess not. You all said yes. Okay, that's it. We can move on to our next topic.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Russell.
Thanks very much, everybody. Yep.
The rest.
Have a great evening. Nice to see everybody.
Likewise.
Thank you, Russell.
So we have Chris Owens with us tonight. Thanks for stopping by.
Hi. Can I
Aye.
mean, like, how do I?
Yeah, we hear you. We see you. Zoom's working perfectly. So we're super excited. Chris has been kind of doing his own research related to the burial ground that was memorialized many, many years ago, which is definitely in need of some new love. And we've kind of twisted Chris's arm to take a more, like, in addition to that project, we've kind of twisted his arm to see if he would be interested in serving on our Historic Preservation Commission to do projects like this and hopefully other projects. So this is basically an interview to see if it might make sense to officially appoint you to that role.
Well, first and foremost, I'm flattered, so thank you. And yeah, I mean, I guess I've just like a couple of years ago, I took a tour on historic Huguenot Street, and I was just kind of shocked at everything that is around that I had no idea existed. And more recently, when everything with the murder of George Floyd, I was just basically showing that it's kind of, you know, you can see a lot of these inequalities in the infrastructure in your local community, where it's like, you know, you have the Elting Cemetery that is like, you know, very well preserved, and then just a few doors down, and through no one's fault, just through this is how we're learning and everything. So, but yeah, I guess I'm really interested in local history, and I would like to be involved in any projects. And as a local shop owner, I think it's kind of a responsibility, actually, like to serve or give back to the community that actively serves my, you know, projects and things like that. So I guess thank you for having me. I'm not, but I really just want to help everyone be able to access their local history in a way that is like more approachable, and tell younger people too, because like they hear a lot of this information and they're shocked. And I think that a lot of people right now, and hopefully moving forward, and especially younger people, are going to be more involved in projects like that. And I think I can help in those ways. So
yeah, I think it's really exciting that you've expressed this interest. And, you know, I'm already seeing the you know, the back and forth and the discussion via email that you're involved in. You've offered some ideas on, you know, how to take next steps for the project to reimagine and improve the burial ground on Huguenot Street. And I think, you know, it's like you have this like perfect like can-do attitude with real thoughtful solutions, you know, on how to make things better. And you know, it's fun because the Historic Preservation Commission members seem like very excited about your interest in this project. So I think, you know, you'll be a welcome member to their already super solid team. So I'm really excited that that you know, we're going to enter a more formal relationship with Chris Owens.
well, thank you. I'm honestly really excited. I'm like I'm a little nervous. But I think it's awesome, and I truly am flattered. I like would love nothing more than to help in any way that I can, truly. And I just am very grateful for, or would be very grateful for, the opportunity to do so. And yeah, and honestly, with that project, there's a ton of people that are already willing. You know, I've been reaching out to different people reached out because I had posted about it a few weeks ago, and people have said like if they can help out in any way. So I think that that's like, you know, it's something we can all do. And truly, everybody's just kind of like sitting at home right now. It's like we should utilize this time to put it towards something that is, you know, will acknowledge history. So I'm excited to, and I really like emailing with the historic preservation. I have to get better with emailing because I'm like out of my, I've been working at Huckleberry. So I got to turn my notifications on. So I'm working on that. But yeah, I'm really excited. I would love to. So if you'll have.
On our village board agenda this evening, we also have an item further down where it says the Oliver House and Stewart's Shop. So I think I shared with you when you and I spoke several days ago about this opportunity, and I've been working with Stewart's on a nearly daily basis for the last couple of weeks on this. And I feel like we're ready to more formally announce next steps. So this concept of, it was a Jacob Wynkoop constructed house, or Mr. Wynkoop had a hand in its construction in the 1800s, and Richard Oliver, his family actually ended up living there in the mid 1800s. But what I think is really interesting as far as like New Paltz Black property owners is that Richard Oliver and Jacob Wynkoop both served in Black infantry units in the Civil War. And we were discussing this the other day at our Juneteenth ceremony on Friday with our town historian, Susan Stessen-Cohen, and we were wondering, like, it seems logical that Mr. Wynkoop and Mr. Oliver knew each other because of their New Paltz connections and having both served in Black infantry units in the Civil War. But we're not certain, and it's one of those things that Susan will take a deeper dive, and other folks will probably end up taking a deeper dive in. But this project with Stewart's is interesting because there is a house on the Stewart's owned property at the corner of Broadhead and 32. And we've been working with Historic Preservation Commission Chair Tom Olson and the representative from Stewart's. And we're trying to see if maybe a historic organization or even another organization that might be interested in preserving the house might be willing to take that structure from the Broadhead location. But the eventual goal is to preserve and recognize the foundation of that structure on Broadhead. And one of the technical things that we had to consider is that there's a stormwater plan that Stewart's will follow on their property. So we met with our village engineer, and we're seeing how that could all work with the Stewart's new shop on that property. Because we want to also maintain the foundation of the Oliver family house. So it seems like everything is working out really well, and we're going to be able to formalize the saving of that foundation from the Oliver family house. And it probably will require a brief return to the planning board of Stewart's. But Stewart's is very motivated to make sure that all the I's and are dotted and T's are crossed regarding this project. So we had a draft letter further down on our agenda, which I don't even think we need to send to Stewart's at this point, because we're probably going to pursue some other paths in terms of just actually formalizing or updating a resolution between Stewart's and the village planning board. But I just wanted to share that with you while we had you here, because I think once we go ahead and officially recognize that we're going to be able to conserve and preserve that foundation, then it'll be the likes of the HPC, and we met with Reverend Jen Berry last week, and high school history teacher Albert Cook. Like, we want to get folks from the community thinking about like ways to best recognize this area. So the jury will be out in terms of like what direction we take it in, but at least the initial steps I think are really positive. So that's my update on that. So I've marked off that agenda item while we had you trapped on this Zoom call. But does the board or Chris have any questions about this project?
No questions, just excitement and gratitude to Chris for volunteering also.
I love that idea. I am excited as well. I think that's great too, like preserving the foundation and then like turning it and getting everybody involved to get some history on it. Because admittedly, I don't know much about it, obviously. So I'm looking forward to learning it all, honestly. So, but thank you all for having me too, and I really appreciate it, honestly. So.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Thank you for the update, Tim. I share the excitement, and it's a high. It has the potential for high visibility in a way that we could really build on that. Like I like the location because there's other places. There's Pencil Hill. That we've talked about. But that's sort of off the beaten path, right? This is like a lot of people drive by that every day. So I'm hoping that we use that as an opportunity for high visibility and yeah.
Yeah, I think the idea is like, there's a few different things going on. We already have the existing slave burial ground on Huguenot Street. Reverend Jen Berry was talking about a marker in front of the Methodist Church on Main Street. There are several different houses that Jacob Weinkoop was involved in constructing. So I think what we're trying to do is like consider everything and figure out like a real comprehensive approach to recognizing our history and the Black property owners that were here and the Black residents that were here in New Paltz in the 1800s. And the other project that Susan Sesson Cohen is working on is, she points to the fact that there were I believe 175 Black individuals in New Paltz in the mid 1800s, and then by the 1940s there were only 5 Black families in New Paltz. So she's trying to understand, well, what exactly happened during that time, that where we ended up with significantly fewer Black individuals in New Paltz. So that'll be an interesting research project to see what Susan finds out about. But I would like to.
You should also mention that we talked to the Historic Commission about the marker on the cemetery on Huguenot Street. We talked about making sure things that we had already were upkeep, but maybe also expanding on what we have. Tom talked about, as well, the lowest hanging fruit in this is to do markers and to start there. So to start figuring out like what houses we should.
Well, that's actually what Chris has been.
He said something about maybe it was you. Maybe he was referring to you. I don't know.
Chris has really been spearheading a lot of that work and doing the research and engaging with the Salt family on Huguenot Street. He's collected some of the documents when A.J. Williams Myers was involved in recognizing that location. He's the former Black Studies chair of SUNY New Paltz. So I feel like, Chris has done a lot of that initial legwork, and then working in conjunction with HBC.
We did get a question in the chat about the marker on Huguenot Street. So.
So I can I guess I can talk on this. So
yeah, do that.
All right. So ready. So basically I got in touch with the Salt family, which owns the property. And we have permission. We have full permission. There's no question about that. To pretty much do whatever as long as we're in communication with them. It just so we don't, they have to know what's going on with their property. But basically, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, with talking with the Historic Preservation Commission, they're able to supply paint and brushes, at least, to get that done, as well as the structuring to basically get the sign repainted. And then after that, you know, really I had the idea of kind of just making it, sprucing up the area. There's a lot of brush there that kind of prevents it on the, I don't know which direction. I guess it would be the north side of the sign. Like there's a lot of brush on that side. So one thing would be getting that out of the way. Just because you can currently only see it from one direction if you're going down Huguenot Street. So that needs to be done for sure as far as landscaping is concerned. But basically, right now, I think the plan is to get the painting done and like redo the sign, which is going to be more intricate. And if anybody has any experience with painting, I could do spray paint and stuff, but I am not at all qualified to do this. But also, I'm not sure if the commission has anybody that like off the top of their head, like, you know, that they've worked with before. I don't know. I've seen like Yankee Construction, I think, is a one company. So I don't really know. But also if there's any painters or artists nearby that would be able to specifically do the lettering, it is an intricate process and does need to be it does need to be done very carefully, because obviously the whole point is making this as effective of a memorial and a marker as possible. So basically, and people do read these signs. I know they say, I know they're like, I know that they are just signs, but sometimes acknowledging, as in many cases in life in general, acknowledging is the first step. So you know what? This is a first perfect step, at least, to improve existing infrastructure that we already should have probably been taken care of. So that being said, it needs to be done very carefully and very well. So basically paint first, landscape after is what I'm thinking right now. And we're talking, I actually just was able to get flyers from the first, like the original installation ceremony. So I do have those, and I'll send them over to the commission, I guess, because they have a file now. I don't know. So yeah, if anyone, but it's like we could definitely do it. And it's being worked on for sure. So if there was a comment, there are gears in motion on it. And there was a lot, honestly, when I posted about it originally, there was a lot of traction on it too. So I have a weird relationship with social media, so I will try and get some more word out there. But I also wanted to make sure that it was done through the proper channels and involving as many people as possible, because as much as I love to be like, yes, okay, let's paint the sign, there's obviously many things to think about beforehand that I have admittedly no prior experience in. So that is that with the sign, I guess. And then the only thing after that would probably be trying to figure out how to maintain it. And I don't know if the salts are responsible for that, or a separate thing of some sort would need to be set up for that, but that's like further down the road. Like we need to get it like painted first. So I guess, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I think your point about maintenance makes a great deal of sense. Like once the sign is repainted and the garden is updated, then I think what would make sense is to officially come up with like a maintenance plan and confirm that the Village Department of Public Works has that on their list of to-do items. Just so it's taken care of the way it should be, considering that this area was identified many years ago, and now we're taking the time to update it. But yeah, I'm really appreciative that you've kind of taken this on, and even though it's a steep learning curve. And the challenge with these signs with the raised lettering is like the lettering is yellow and the back of the sign is blue, and how does that get repainted? But I'm super optimistic, based on what I've seen from you trying to organize this effort so far, that you will figure this out. So I feel like we've identified the right person to be our project manager. So my motion is to appoint Chris Owens for a seat as an alternate on the Historic Preservation Commission with a term that expires May of 2022.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Chris. Thank
Thank
you
you,
for
Chris.
the problem and for very thoughtfully taking action and doing something about it.
Thank you.
So
I'm
really appreciative of that.
Thank you. I'm excited. And thank you for having me. And if anyone knows anyone that has any experience possibly in historic preservation at all, send them my way. And because I can't do it, and as much as I would love to say that Alexa could do it, I don't know that she wants to take I don't know that she wants to take on that project, because it's so but thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good stuff.
All right, cool.
Thanks. All right, so we're going to jump to our next agenda item, the in-person meetings. So we had that as a discussion topic last time. I think we left it where either Ariana or Alana or both were gonna, try to see whether it made sense or how logistically this could be done, just in terms of where we would set up tables or how we could get the meeting recorded. So what are your thoughts?
So I'll tell you all that Alana and I did do a test run yesterday, and we did not use Zoom. We just used YouTube Live, and we did it in between all of the buildings where the picnic table rather is. And I put my village laptop on the picnic table, and we were both wearing masks. We stood about 12 feet back, 12 feet apart. And I was actually thoroughly impressed by the sound that was picked up just by this laptop's microphone. You could hear us very clearly in the video. We watched it afterwards. And I think, if all of you want to be in one space, you could definitely wear masks and be heard in that way. I also think that we probably could figure it out in a way where you could sit 6 feet apart. The main thing would be just that, we'd have to bring some kind of furniture out. And do you care about whether or not you have a desk or a table in front of you, or is just a chair enough? And then, watch the weather.
What about road noise? Are there issues with background noise?
It didn't seem like it, but we didn't do it for long enough to really tell. And it wasn't particularly windy, so that was not a factor in that moment. But yeah, I think, it seemed really good, but it was pretty quiet at that time.
So I like that, because I was thinking we would all need our laptops and we would have to Zoom individually. I'm surprised to hear that it could just get captured with the one laptop.
I was also surprised.
Do we want to think about trying it, but having a backup plan? If it explodes, Alex just goes to her house and we go with our laptops far away from I don't know, because Alex lives across the street.
Yeah, because I live in Village Hall.
I think we should do a trial run if you guys really want to, or do it, we could do it a little bit before the meeting starts.
Right.
And everyone just goes home, if it doesn't work.
Another idea we could consider is we could open up the garage bay at the Public Works garage, and we could sit just inside the garage, and then we're like covered if, we get whacked with a thunderstorm. And then, we could probably just use some tables or something from inside there, then, still have the ability to encourage people to show up and hang out in our parking lot.
Oh yeah, how would we do public comment? Like, so we would be able to have people still like get picked up while being really far from all of us, from just one device.
Well, I'm not sure that was one thing that Alana and I did discuss, is where public commenters could go in order to be heard. And maybe they actually could go a little closer to the laptop, even if they're not on the screen. Maybe they're like next to the picnic table facing all of you. But people would still be able to comment on YouTube the way they are right now.
Oh, right. Yeah. Although it would be nice also for them to be in person, but if they couldn't be visible in person, still be in person. But I feel like we can figure that out.
All right, I'm just trying to imagine how this looks with 5 people, 6 to 10 feet apart. That's quite a bit of distance collectively.
Don't you do it like a zigzag so that it's not a line? So it's like 6 feet between all. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as opposed to 1, 2, a much longer line.
It would have to be exactly that, KT. Yeah.
What exactly is our goal here? Are we hoping, or are we anticipating that
KT
like
wants
the
to be
public,
outside?
right? Are we
That
thinking
doesn't
that
feel like a good enough reason.
we'll engage more people from the public? They'll show up, like just that it's novel will attract some more interest.
I just thought it would be an interesting thing to do for the summer in light of the constraints that we're under. I am on team let's do more stuff outside. So I guess it is because I want to be outside. But I think it's just, we don't know what we're going to get. Maybe, I don't know. I think it's just experimenting in the way that we've said we should experiment with stuff. And also, I mean, I don't know. I was just saying to somebody today that, as much as we just said we didn't love Zoom so much, I love that I can see faces when I'm talking to you. So I feel like this format is more conversational as opposed to the like when we're in a row sitting there like that, so I don't know. Maybe we'll like being more proximate to each other again. I don't know. I just feel like it's.
You could do a horseshoe.
We were eating outside and doing all the tables, so I figured, let's have board meetings outside.
Well, Ariana, do you want to set this up? Like, is this something you feel you can get done?
Yeah, I mean, if you guys really want to do it, we absolutely can. I don't think it would be that difficult to make happen.
Well, let's try it at our next meeting then, our next village board meeting. Is that a joint meeting, the next one?
It is. Is that, wait, it might be. Is it 8th?
It is July 8th. Yeah. I mean, that would make sense. It's a couple of weeks from now. I didn't put anything out about what we're doing for it yet, in terms of Zoom or YouTube or in person. So it would make sense. We could still announce it.
What do you think about that idea of using the, the garage bay with the DPW garage? That provides a, what?
That's not exactly outdoors. Sort of defeating.
No, the idea is that
DPW and we'd just shift if it rained or something.
Oh, as a backup, yeah. Well,
you're sitting at the edge of the garage, so
yeah.
You're more outdoors than I am right now.
Got it. So definitely do a trial run of this. I think is important. We have all the mayor and all the trustees together and see if it works.
More than what Ariana and Alana did yesterday?
Yeah, yeah. With two people, that's a little different. We'll have five. So, and the spacing of that is with one laptop seems a little problematic to me.
So
I
didn't
really don't think that the
we
number of
decided we would
people will
do it
make
at
an
6:30?
I really don't think that the number of people will make a difference in terms of being able to
Okay.
capture everybody in the video and capture the sound. I think
Right.
it's more just about everybody's comfort levels and whether or not you feel like it functions well.
Right.
But if it's joint, that's 5 more people. So I don't know if that's a good night to do it.
Yeah, 10 people would be, I don't think we can do it with that. I think we could definitely do it with the 5 of you, but I think 10 would really be a struggle.
It's also our option
So
if we
we're
want to
saying
do it.
at the next meeting after, start at 6:30 and try it out.
I'm okay with trying.
Yeah, July 22nd, that feels good.
Okay, let's shoot for that.
Good.
Thank you.
All right, next agenda item, we have mass gatherings. So we've discussed this before. This is an incredibly complicated puzzle that seems like it shouldn't be hard to figure out, but this feels like it's way above my pay grade. Who wants to take it?
Oh, it's an easy one.
I actually think that we can fold this into the next agenda item because some of the things related to it came up quickly on the short list of things when we started looking at rules that we had on the books that we should probably have a conversation about. So the reason I put this back on the agenda is because we identified that we had issues with our mass gathering permitting in last fall with the issue of the March where group didn't have insurance and were asking us to waive the insurance. And, you know, we've sort of struggled with this for a while now, this issue of insurance and when groups don't have insurance, but, you know, often people find, you know, someone else's insurance that they can get a rider on or something. But when this group didn't have insurance, you know, they were asking us for the waiver, and we took a closer look at the parameters surrounding allowing for gatherings in community, and there's ACLU case law that you can't use a monetary barrier to free speech, and that would be a monetary barrier. So that came up as a big issue that we need to think about when if we're gonna add mass gatherings to our, you know, reimagining list. The other thing is that we still have on the books in the village that if you're on the sidewalk, you need to get a permit. But we fell into a practice of, okay, if folks are not going to need the street closed, and if they'll stay on the sidewalks, then we won't require them to go through the permitting process, which I think was also often a backdoor, you know, for groups that didn't have insurance, right? And also events that sort of happened in response to current events that, you know, there certainly wasn't a village board meeting in between the event and the thing happening. So we need to clean that up because we, you know, we're not doing what's on our books basically, and we've been pretty honest about this for a while. But you know, when I took a deeper dive into all the stuff, and you know, I really like, you know, how Ithaca has it set up. I don't think that we can have the big discussions. You know, well, let me just finish that thought. So Ithaca sort of approaches it all from a different angle. Like they have a road permitting thing, and they have a do you need a police thing. It's not about the event per se, but it's like, hey, you're having an event which triggers all these other things. And our process as well is complicated by the fact that it overlaps with the town because the police are involved and we don't have purview over the police. So think, again, we need to step back, as we'll see in a few minutes when we start talking about laws that we want to reconsider, that this is going to be part of that conversation and this permitting thing.
I don't really see how it gets baked into that other discussion. I really feel like there's no good or easy way to figure out how to permit mass gatherings. Like if someone wants to have a gathering tomorrow, they can. Like there's no process where they could get village or town board approval. There's no process where they're required to ask the police if it's okay. You know, our practice is we encourage organizers to give elected officials or the police a heads up. And, you know, we would love it if groups have insurance. But I don't see how we formalize this stuff. That's why I said before that I feel like it's above my pay grade, and I don't know that Ithaca has a plan that addresses these concerns. And like we've discussed this before, like we require groups to complete an event form to use Hasbrook Park, but if you have a birthday party at Hasbrook Park, like no one is filling out event forms. You know, maybe the line in the sand is like a for-profit entity versus not a for-profit entity. There's just so many, there's so many variables. I do not see how we do this.
So I think you need to step back and answer the question, okay, well, why is there a permitting process, right? And I think the reason I like Ithaca's things better is because it's about the punch list of what needs to get done. And like, so if you want to have a gathering in Hasbrook Park, right, you don't need it for a birthday party. But if you want a gathering of 100 people, what does that trigger? What needs does that trigger? What public safety needs does that trigger? You know, what garbage and, you know, waste management needs does that trigger?
I understand all of those concerns, but in reality, if a group wants to show up tomorrow in Hasbrook Park with 100 or 1,000 people, they can do it.
Right. So what are you arguing for? Just taking.
I'm just saying that, like, I like, I feel like we're kind of like spinning our wheels, like trying to come up with a process.
I mean, we're spinning our wheels on something that's covered by the Constitution and like this right that's been chipped away, like systematically since like 1987, until the point where we see like the whole SUNY system like creating these like free speech zones that like it doesn't even make sense. The whole you know, the whole country is a free speech zone. Like the permitting process like makes sense like for planned events, you know, because it tells people like who to get in touch with and where there's buried cables, you know, in Hasbrook
Right.
Park. And like it's one way to get like contact information in case of an emergency out there. But you know, New Paltz was the case law in the most recent free speech First Amendment like lawsuit, you know, back with Occupy, that like really proves like none of this stuff can like limit an indigent groups from gathering. It's really interesting.
So
I agree.
think we
That
just need
I
to step
agree. It's
back.
very interesting.
We have, I don't know, well, number one, we're not abiding what our law is on the books, because we're basically saying, sorry, I left my laptop and I'm not doing multitasking with looking at two different documents.
Yeah, I think our
At
law
the same time.
isn't
But our, you know,
legal.
74-1, no person shall take part in any procession, assemblage, or parade, or use a loudspeaker or sound amplifier on any of the streets, sidewalks, parks, or public spaces in the village of New Paltz without first having obtained a written permit therefore, except for funeral processions. So, you know, in answer to you, this into the next conversation, I mean, I'm not advocating, I'm not making the argument, but I think in the conversation about what we're regulating and what we are asking to our police to enforce, do we agree that this something that should still be on the books? Like, and that's why I said, why do we ask for permits? What are the permits trigger? What are the needs trigger? You actually, when you said planned events, Alex, it triggered for me, like that actually is a differentiator that I hadn't thought of before. Like planned events versus protests that are, you know, it's a different thing, a protest, than a planned event. You know, having the regatta, you know, parade is different from political protests. So maybe that's, but we cannot these and I wish I could remember the things from memory, but in any of these laws and how we address any of this, uh, public space usage decisions must be content neutral with respect to time, place, and manner. So it may be hard and we may not be able to do a large different thing, make it different. At a minimum, I think that we have to align our practice with what's on the books, and currently it's not.
Well, yeah, definitely. That's what I found really interesting, because this whole question of like, why do we have like a permit process? Why is it so like the norm, and what's it trigger? I think the permit triggers, you know, the permission triggers the revocation of the permit, you know, which is what is on the books. You know, it's in chapter like 74-4 of our code. And that's a chapter that's all about like police enforcement that is in the village code. It's weird because I never saw it in there before. I also don't know what public calamity means, you know. It's an interesting little chapter. And I think that's why this mechanism of permitting was in place like back in the day, you know. But this all precedes like the, you know, the court precedent and the court ruling that is the ruling law of our court district regarding like, you know, finances, like not being able to restrict, you know, gatherings, you know, for free speech purposes. And Occupy New Paltz was that example. So, you know, what and how the assembly, you know, looks like or sounds like, I think was covered really well in that case. We definitely should take a look at that whole chapter 74, that's like the issuance of the permit and the revocation of the permit, because I think that is not in alignment with the you know, current interpretation of the Constitution that we need to go with.
All right, so it sounds like Alex and I are willing to look at this a little more closely. So
Alex, I'm curious, like, for like an event that relates to free speech. So let's say you had 100 people in the park, and you're saying it's a rally about a particular political topic. How is there like a line in the sand that differentiates that from a group that assembles in the park to throw a frisbee? Like, do they need a permit?
So, you know, the frisbee throwers are not protected by the First Amendment, you know, but we like frisbee throwing, so, you know, we'll do what we can to make sure they do so safely. So there's something, so that's where the part about indigent groups is the key part. So local activists are indigent groups. A local sports league is not. They collect dues, probably somebody's like, chipping in like to get the supplies. They have a uniform, so on down the line. Like now I just made this Frisbee league into something very official, but that's usually the line in the sand. And that's the line in the sand that the ACLU papers that went along with the Occupy New Paltz lawsuit really highlights. So the key word is indigent groups. And so again, that's why that's been, just from things I've organized as an activist, that was always my path, like we're just a group of people that want to organize against rape culture, that don't collect dues. We don't have any affiliation with anything, how would we ever come up with insurance? That's the big difference. That's the line in the sand, if that makes sense.
But like NYPIRG is a legit group with like a formal structure. So would they be told that they need to go through a more formal event form process because they can be identified as a group that clearly exists? They're not just like a loose knit group of activists.
Well, before this ruling, thanks to Occupy New Paltz, I would say that would be a really interesting point to debate. But it's now you can't really, if someone argues free speech, you can't, and they say that they cannot afford the permitting process or the timeline that we put forth, that is based on our, calendar, and our clerk's office hours and all that, kind of like lost that one there. But yeah, normally it's like, oh, like that's why we would always like try, like different groups we would try and like find, like, oh, Sierra Club Mid Hudson, could you please co-sponsor, and like give us like, your insurance so that we can have this like big Earth Day event, and like just scrambling to get that all together. Even though the event would not be for profit, it'd be for educational purposes, like because of that argument.
So Alex, I mean, indigent just means poor, that you don't have the resources. It doesn't mean that you're not organized. So I'm just,
Right.
I mean, is there a different legal definition of indigent, or is it literally that you don't have the resources? Because that's a different thing than, that you're NYPORG or you're organized, whether, you know what I mean?
No, you're
Like,
right. That's
also what is poor,
it's a money
like,
thing.
Okay, but and we could go on all night with lots of interesting examples, and I think we all agree this is like a challenging and also fascinating thing to try to figure out. But like going back to the Frisbee example, right? Like the let's say this group of Frisbee players, they're not part of a league. They're just a loose knit group of friends, and maybe they're gathering in the park to memorialize a friend that passed away, and there are 100 of them that will be there. So do they need to get a permit for their quote unquote event, or can they say that they're just gathering like an indigent group?
I mean, according to our laws in the books, like, they don't have many protections right now, but like they could make that argument, I think. But again, it's like free speech and indigent are like the two things that go together, like, so if they were smart, they could make that argument.
That's what I struggle with is I feel like nearly every group could say, hey, I'm not subject to your permit process.
Yeah, and I think this actually gets at the heart of, like a lot of the ongoing discussions just about, policing and how we run things in general, because it's like why do we even have these processes when like it's just to trigger like this section of the law that's like the revocation of the permit in case of calamity or emergency or other people's rights, you know, to quiet enjoyment of their home like being like violated. But the thing is, like, all those things are already on the books in the US Constitution and the New York State Constitution. Like, those rights for other community members to have a quiet Saturday afternoon within reason are already protected. You know, the right for everybody to enjoy that park, you know, is already protected. Like,
So
it
that's
just
why
blows my
I
mind that
like,
you know, there's all these extra laws.
so let me try again to go back to this, because that's why I land at, rather than like, hi, I need a permit for my thing, I visualize, you know, somebody goes to the website and they click, I got a thing, I need police for it. I got a thing, I need to shut down the street for it. Like, it's about whatever that needs. It's not like permission to do it. It's like a process, so that, I mean, because we need to give the police when, you know, 500 people are going to march down Main Street, right? So it's a police need. So instead of making it like, give me permission to have my event, it's a process by which you submit the needs for your event. Now, yeah, those things cost money too. So this is also a whole nother wrinkle to this that we haven't talked about. You know, we have churches that do parades and they pay for their police coverage. I think even Gay Pride pays for their parade police coverage now. I don't want to misquote, but you know, so that's a whole other tangent, but highly related to this. If we go to not like permit my event, but rather need public safety, need waste management help, need whatever the things, all the punch list of things that then we evaluate are needed or not needed for a certain situation, it becomes about the punch list, not permission to do the thing. But then if they don't have money to pay cops,
then you can't.
I mean, it's a little bit semantic. I get that, but it's also a framework that communicates it very differently.
Yeah, I'm into that, definitely. That makes sense, because, you know, the same rules would still like apply, obviously. You know, we still wouldn't be able to like limit free speech, you know, like of, you know, and any of those the costs along with those, that punch list could not be a limitation like that prevents, you know, indigenous populations from, you know, assembling and, you know, exercising free speech. Yeah, it's interesting just finding like this whole chapter, you know, 74 in our code, like, just like, what is this?
That sounds awful. That sounds like we don't even need to talk about that.
I want to delete it,
I think.
Right, but I
like,
think
so let's just think about an unintended consequence of our practice is that people don't go through the permitting process because we're like, hey, you don't need a permit if you're going to be on the sidewalk. So then we don't have any like all our punch listing of those things goes on behind the radar. You know, I see things happening. One of you guys sees a thing happening. We text the chief of police. We're like, hey, we think there's an event, you know, and it becomes invisible to the public because we've created a situation where people don't go for the permit because of all the things that we've been discussing. So that's why I like a solution that gets us so people are not desensitized to tell us what's up. And I know there's always going to be things that people aren't going to tell us about, but you try to catch all ones that you can, and we're not catching them because our system doesn't allow us to do that. We actually have created a system where we have to figure it out informally.
Right. So I understand why you're brought this up as a topic and connecting it to the next agenda item is, you know, we have laws that are probably not laws that we want, and probably not laws that we want our police department to enforce. So that's what we're trying to figure out. So should we, so you guys are going to take a closer look at that section to see if it makes sense trying to salvage it, or should we?
I think we should just redline that, Alex, and
Yeah.
make
Okay, so let's move on to the next agenda item then. Sound good?
Sounds good. I'm just making a note to myself, or I guess to everybody, because you're all in the doc. Cool. All right, good.
So who wants to introduce the topic?
Well, Alex, you shared the article from the Atlantic, or
That was
who?
KT.
That was me.
Okay, do you want to summarize
I'm-
that conversation?
Yeah. So at our last meeting, Alex brought up this idea, I think it was Alex, of that we should take a look at our laws and see if there's things we're having police do that we're unnecessarily having police do. The big discussion about defund the police, I personally feel is narrowly focused on budgeting. And this idea that Alex came up with recognizes that when we look at the laws that we have on the books, it's not just about what we spend on police, it's what we use our police for, right? So this idea was to take an inventory of the laws, and a lot of them fall under, this very big concept, quality of life, where maybe we don't want our police doing that anymore. So obviously these are salient conversations in our country, in our new pods, everywhere right now. And I think half the conversations I'm having on this topic. And the reason I encouraged you all to read the article, The Myth of Police Reform, it's really short, succinct article that I've used in many of my classes. It's deeply sociological because it takes a sociological perspective on policing and what we have police do. And basically, the argument he makes is that if you just think about the police, you're having the wrong conversation. You have to look at public safety in a very big way and sort of reimagine what that means. And you also have to realize that we use lots of different interventions, institutions, to use the social institutions to address social problems. And we've fallen into this using the police to do lots of things that perhaps should be done by other folks like social workers and substance abuse counselors. And, he uses the example in the argument, police are chasing guys down, that didn't pay their child support, and we had a drastic reduction in the support system for mental illness, for substance abuse, for lots of things that now we send the police in for. And the second really important part of his argument is that police use force. So, if you send in a policeman rather than a social worker, you're using force, and you're saying that this social problem needs to be remedied with force. And the argument is that that's a completely inappropriate way, and that police should do policing and social workers should do social working, et cetera, et cetera. And if the people in our country were taken better care of, and the other institutions that were supposed to remedy these other social problems, and it wasn't falling on the cops. So basically, you can't fix everything in the hammer argument, right? And also it's very sociological in that it's not, you can't just have a conversation about the incidents with the police on the streets. You have to go way back upstream to the root of the problem, which is, why is that cop on the street doing what they're doing at that moment in time? So that's why I really like that article. And I think it really dovetailed with this idea of taking inventory, so what can we do? We've been talking a lot about, we feel really strongly, we want to be part of this reimagining policing and public safety that, is happening everywhere in our country right now. We now have a governor that's, put a mandate on police departments to do similarly, to really, really take this historical moment and not let it pass. While we're all, the gaze is on us, and we don't want to avert the gaze movement before we take action and we change the things that that many of us didn't see were wrong and now see are wrong. So I think as village board members, this is a really good first step in terms of like, well, what can we do? We're not police commissioners. We don't hold the purse strings, but indirectly we do if we're sending cops out to do things that maybe, I'm like I'm saying to Tim, I want to throw like every single piece of spaghetti on the wall and see what sticks, like maybe we just like, this inventory is just to figure out like what we don't need and what we can take off of the police's hands. Now, the second part of my thoughts on that is I don't want to have a vacuum, we need our community in this conversation, right? So for example, if we were proposed getting rid of the noise ordinance and said that this falls into that category, it's a quality of life thing. This is not a thing that we think police, people armed should be addressing. What would that look like? And I've been thinking a lot about I want to say to the community, and I see a lot of people on social media saying this. Well, then, so how are we going to do this? Like both at the community level, and then when the incidents occur, are we going to set up, should we set up mutual aid networks? Should we set up, neighborhood blocks? There's got to be there's so many neighborhood level network stuff that could front end noise ordinance issues and a lot of these other laws that I think that we're going to look at. So I don't think we can do this. We could do this laterally, and we could do this. I mean, we're required to go through public hearings. Are we required to go through public hearings when we take laws off the books?
Yes.
Okay. So,
because that is a local law.
Right. So the taking off is the public hearing thing. Okay. Because I thought of that today. And then we have to think about, if we have mutual aid, when there are incidents, what does that look like? I want to hear all the ideas. It's not just a conversation about policing. It's about building community and creating a community where we're not freaking fighting about noise ordinances and the stuff that gets our goats and gets us like this, right? I know this is very rose colored, but I feel like there's an opportunity, and there's little kernels of this already happening. Cherry Hill isn't in the village, but they've had an organized email list forever. Plains Road, they have an organized email list forever. Let's talk to those folks. How did that happen? And I saw it with my own eyes when they had issues in those neighborhoods. They were already together and talking to each other about them. Right. One other sidebar thought, I think I covered all the intro stuff that I wanted to say, but I was thinking about the permitting and the closing of roads and how we're closing roads and how we need to be in small groups together. And, the neighborhood block party idea, and how we're not supposed to be in large groups now anyway. I want to make it easier, for me to shut down Lincoln Place and Miles to show a movie to 20 people socially distant. But I don't want a permitting process for that. Like, I want to just go to my neighbors and be like, can we shut down just this little part of our block? Like, and that sort of stemmed off that idea that I think Nate, I saw on social media. Like, so there's the networks, there's the, what does it look like when the things actually happen, but there's also other things that we can do, like have a big party when the students come back, welcoming them back and getting to know each other. You know, the noise ordinance thing, when you see the debates about it, lots of people are like, talk to your neighbors. The time to talk to your neighbors is not when they're playing their music too loud or their dog is barking incessantly. The time to talk to your neighbors is way before that. And I say this as, I know people, but I know my folks here will back me up. I'm pretty freaking introverted when I'm not extroverted. So like, I get it. Like, everybody wants to go out and have block parties with their neighbors. I want it to not be that. I want it to be, I don't know. I'm gonna leave it at that. I'm probably getting things, but I want to hear from other people.
That was a good summary. Yeah, so like I started just like looking in the code, you know, for all references, you know, and there's like 44 different spots where the Village of New Paltz code uses New Paltz police for enforcement of like a village code that doesn't even necessarily have a town same as, or is something, I think KT talked about the noise ordinance pretty well, like that's a good intro, but, or like with the open container where it actually is additional, and there's plenty of state laws on the books that address all, like the whole list of horror stories that the open container, the Village of New Paltz open container law is supposed to address. You know, like there's no loss of laws, you know, like there's a whole list of them that could be used to solve those problems. So it just is like a superfluous thing. So last meeting I had called it, you know, this, it's kind of an old movement, but to turn blue laws green. I feel like it's more like, you know, taking like, some of these aren't blue laws, some of them are even more recent. And it's just very, I think it's important right now, KT said it, but just want to ride on it, but like really important to take a look at like, just like where we're at as a society right now, like ready to have these conversations about like why we do certain things. Because it's interesting to me that, you know, the Village of New Paltz would have examples of broken window policing on the books that aren't from the 70s. So yeah, 44 different references in which the police must enforce those laws, whereas for most of them, there's already another law that could address like the emergency component, or calamity, or, you know, danger component of that problem it's supposed to address. And then a number of those 44 references actually do show up in a strange chapter of our code, chapter 39, which is where in the 70s, the village had abolished, you know, the police and, you know, joined forces with the town, like on being policed by the town police. But in that chapter, it does also contain a section for the Village of New Paltz to appoint a police commissioner. And so it's interesting that that's been in the books this whole time. So no wonder I've been so confused. So I think 44 is like a very high range just because of chapter 39 still being in the books. Did that make any sense? Or was I just spewing numbers?
What did you say about the police
It was about
commission and the
8%,
village?
yeah.
Oh, okay. So chapter 39 of Village of New Paltz Code, the first part of it is about abolishing the police in 1978. And there's a section of chapter 39 that is not rescinded. It is in the books about us appointing a member of the Town of New Paltz Police Department Police Commission. Hence a lot of my confusion when I thought, yeah, how things work. So that's, you know, something that we'll need to make sure we go back, and we have a lot of editing to do.
Is that an example of one section of the code was updated and then there was reference somewhere else that was overlooked that just did not get updated? I'm not exactly following what you're describing.
No, no. It's just an example of a chapter of the code that I guess the town updated their end, but the village never passed a new law to reflect whatever the police commission formation is, because the village doesn't get to appoint a member of it. And I'm just referencing this whole chapter because it does kind of make our count of use of police force a little bit higher than it really is in reality. Because it's not real, right? But still 44 references in which we use police for enforcement in our code is I don't know if it's yeah, that's a lot.
So is that where we should start? We should look at those 44 references and see whether we want to have those laws at all?
Or, well, what we want with them. Why we want to, I think the first question is, why are police being used as enforcement, especially of a village only law, especially when we have no stake in, besides as taxpayers, but as a village government, we have no stake in how that policing is done, how that enforcement is done, anything like that. I think that's a big question. Why would we always turn to the police for enforcement of these various laws? A lot of them actually, they make sense. It's like vehicles and traffic, just additional wonky village type stuff. Like that makes sense for now to have as police enforcement, in my opinion, but it's a good question to have, I think. So I started listing them all. I didn't get very far because it's been a week. But some of them are the quality of life laws that are village specific laws, like KT mentioned the noise ordinance, and I mentioned the open container law, which is a pedestrian open container law. It had, it's known, like people who are now the DA of our county have called it a great example of broken windows policing right here, in the village.
Alex,
yeah.
I don't know that everybody is familiar with that terminology, broken windows theory.
Let me get to my notes on it.
It's sociological.
Is it? I'm like, I don't know where I learned
this
this stuff.
You clean up a place. The argument is if you clean up a place, people will feel better about it and you'll have less crime. But it was just subterfuge for gentrification and displacement, and doesn't address root causes.
Yeah, and like the way I've always
find your definition. Am I close?
That was really good. So my definition is that it's practices that can result in overcriminalization and unnecessary incarceration, other negative impacts on an individual's life. So, I understand, like we're a college town, like like the noise ordinance and open container law work hand in hand. We want people to be safe. We want to not perpetuate rape culture. We don't want people to drink and drive, so we got to do something about it. Well, good news is there is already an open container law on the books in New York State that addresses, drinking and driving, or just anything to do with vehicles and alcohol. All these other, disorderly conduct is on the books.
That one stood out for me, Alex. I mean, it seems like a lot of this stuff could just fall under disorderly conduct.
Yeah, well, the thing is about these, so open container and noise in particular make it so, and us having like the whole section about enforcement in it, it has like this extra component where it's like the village law is asking for the police to like enforce and like basically to criminalize like everyday behavior in a college town, in such a way that like if disorderly conduct were occurring, it would be addressed, but because we have this this pedestrian open container law, as well as the noise ordinance on the books, that's what people are getting called to the scene for, by somebody, or they're trolling and they're like, oh gosh, I think this is, an example of noise violation, or these people might have in that water bottle alcohol, like I have to enforce that weird village law. And what people wind up getting hit with is, or maybe not, but like it could suddenly become disorderly conduct, like the disorderly conduct would be covering, the examples that we want taken care of already. Like that's it. And I think that clarifies it. That's why it's the state law, like I do want to also add, like, there's a big reason why, the state legislature right now is working to repeal laws such as loitering, stuff like that. And I feel like our open container law in particular, as well as our noise ordinance in practice, are just like, loitering in New York City. Like, it's the gateway it's asking for this additional enforcement. It's criminalizing behavior in this like kind of weird subjective way, and then it brings you to the bigger problem, and would it have been disorderly conduct, that they were called to handle, like, or does it become disorderly conduct? Often, yeah, like, or sometimes, yeah, just, in that kind of interaction, for sure. It just creates this additional, like, over criminalizing of pretty normal behavior.
So if the village did not have a noise ordinance and did not have an open container law, I feel like what you're describing, though, is because there's the state disorderly conduct law, would anything really be that different in terms of like a law that the police department could or would reference if they were responding to something that, where a neighbor called because there was a loud party nearby? Could the police show up and say, hey, you guys have been, accused of disorderly conduct, as opposed to you've been accused of violating the noise ordinance? How is it different?
I think it would decrease like the need for those kinds of responses. This is something that police are trained, to handle disorderly conduct. When they come to New Paltz, I have no idea like what kind of extra training they get to deal with our very weird specific laws. But I think back to the noise ordinance, it's interesting how people will even like weaponize this, against each other, in lieu of being good neighbors. Like, and it goes both ways. Like, there will be like one neighbor that's like a family of kids, and that dog that just borks all the time, and then like next to a house full of like students that are on the opposite schedule, and like, not that I've been in this exact situation myself, but like totally weaponizing back and forth like the noise ordinance, whereas like in neither case was it like a true disturbance of anyone's like constitutional right to quiet enjoyment. Like, if that were the case, all parties would have been ticketed, right? Like, people weaponize these against each other, and it creates like less community. It makes it so you don't have to get to know your neighbors. It leads to all these other problems.
Right. Like what about the conversation that we could potentially have where, let's say you had a neighbor who was frustrated with noise coming from their neighbor, and you call the police, and would the atmosphere of how that's being handled feel and end up being very different if that police officer A didn't have a gun or B didn't have a taser, and they were there to respond to a complaint, like would they have to rely on different tools as opposed to the fear component? Like most people are going to be a little bit more fearful interacting with someone who has weapons, and maybe the police would approach the situation differently if they didn't have that as a tool.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that has come up in a lot of like the community debates, for sure, is like, changing the approach. But also just saying like, when you're responding to like the code, the law is noise ordinance. If somebody is being noisy during these hours, like that's it, you broke the law, like that. So
Can I
I
jump
don't know if we
in?
have a choice to change how the police respond, like, because we're not, sorry, let me just finish this thought. The
Mhm.
village, I don't think we get to tell the police how they can respond to breaking of a village law, but we can change the village law, so that it doesn't have that police response, component to such a lower threshold. Because you're right, the noise ordinance, open container, they should require a lower threshold of like violent power in response, but we don't have control as the village board over that.
Yeah,
So
we
we can
definitely
change the
don't.
law instead.
I think we're also just like spitballing generally on this topic. Like I completely recognize that we're not officially involved in the conversation about how police show up and what tools or weapons they may or may not have.
So
The only conversation that we're involved in is the laws that are on the books in the village.
So right now,
So-
because we have a militarized police, because we also have a noise ordinance, that's all there is to it, right? Like a noise ordinance that
Which-
requires police for enforcement.
which effectively communicates to our community, you don't need to deal with it in a different way. And so that's why I go back to where I started, which is why we can't just take it away. We need to work with our community to be like, we don't want to communicate to our community that this is how you deal with noise and this is how you deal with some of these issues. We want to communicate to our community that it shouldn't need to be use of force. It should be way farther up the stream and front ended. Now, again, you're always going to have the incident, so you're going to have to figure out what incident level is going to look at. But if you treat the disease and not the symptom, you get a lot less doctor appointments. So, well, you have more because you're doing preventative, but bad analogy. But do you get what I'm saying? Like I feel like as an elected official, because we are saying that we're in support of, weaponizing, that not in support of weaponizing, but we're in support of that. This is how we remedy this social problem. And I want to say to my community, tell me how we can do this differently so we don't need to send cops with guns to college parties that are too loud.
Agreed, but I don't think there's ever been a need to have a law on the books
No, I'm agreeing
that
with
has
you. I'm not
17
disagreeing.
references 17 references to police in enforcement of the Village of New Paltz noise ordinance, by the way.
I messed up if you thought I was disagreeing with you. I'm 100% agreeing with you, but I'm saying that we can't just talk about the cop at the door at the party. Like we got to go way upstream. And we can't do that alone. I'm
very
willing
true.
to do it. I mean, I'm willing to do it. Don't get me wrong. I just think right here, right now, there's a lot of energy and a lot of people who, let's do it. This something that seemed not possible before is possible. show us with us how. And I think the police are partners with this too. You know, like they weren't too happy with us about that 5-foot rule in the I gotta say with the driveway, which is the same thing, and I own that. I'm gonna eat some crow right now on that. Like I'm totally rethinking that. You know, like especially because we didn't even know that we wanted it enforced all the time. We thought we were helping, and we were actually just adding another rule. We were avoiding dealing with it maybe differently and sending cops with guns to people's doors or telling them their car is too close. That's just like no.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of this also percolated on discussions about enforcing social distancing. I mean, I was very, very much on the team. You know that I don't. The cops shouldn't be enforcing that. I would if we had all this community stuff about, then that would have been easier. The masks and all of it.
Agreed. So do you envision in taking on, you know, these heavy hitters? Because again, it's noise ordinance and open container that have the most references to using police force for enforcement. And those are the two that have other laws that like address the problems. Like those are the two biggest ones. Do you think, like, do you see like just like redrafting them somehow, like the enforcement in some way? Like that seems really hard. Like it just seems to make more sense to get rid of these superfluous laws while opening up that conversation and like working on something, you know, that really works, you know, instead of it being like kind of like crossing out like police and inserting like whatever we figure out, you know.
Yeah, I mean, you're looking for like what's our next steps, and I feel like we just talking, so I'm a little like part of me wants to just be like, all right, well, you know, what does it look like if we just take the noise ordinance and open container stuff off the books? But I don't know if you all want to talk about the 44 enforcement things. I don't know if different people want to take a different piece of this. I mean, I wouldn't mind, you know, writing something up to our community to describe how we're doing this, and, you know, writing a letter to editor and putting it on social. You know, come to us with your ideas and your thoughts, you know, watch this meeting, see this conversation, talk to us about this stuff. I don't know.
Yeah, because like so my original thought, like after, you know, first pitching a couple of meetings back, you know, looking at an inventory was like, oh, and inserting, you know, like the ideal approach, like the way like we want it. But when I started to like look for other examples, I simply was finding that like some of these laws are like pretty egregious. Like I just, especially in this climate, like it's just this, it's, you know, if New York State's like repealing loitering, and that's straight up, you know, like for the same reasons, like, and not replacing something else, you know, like not saying like, oh, a social worker will show up when you're loitering. No, it's just like
the replacement thing doesn't happen in the law. That happens outside of the law. So
I just, yeah, it's just, I don't know. I
mean, I think we should talk about it at our next meeting. It's a joint meeting, so we should also, you know, I think the police chief told me already he's going to be there. So, you know, we can talk to the town about how we're thinking this. I would encourage them to think similarly, to not just think about budgeting, but think about what they're sending the cops to do as well. I mean, maybe they have a whole different section. I don't know.
Okay, so where does that leave it for this evening? You want to just bring it back for the joint meeting discussion?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I'll keep
I was
adding.
going to ask. Oh, there's two things I was going to mention, so there is taking laws off the books, and there is also conversations with the police and saying about enforcement, like we say, hey, don't enforce this. And I'm pretty sure we can have a conversation with our police chief, so there's decriminalizing not enforcement, and then there's completely taking it off the books as well. So we might want to just think about that. And then I also was wondering, we might not be there yet, but if there's any data that could help us, like I feel like I need to know the landscape, but I mean, since COVID, everything's changed, but it would still just be for me, just like when I wanted to figure out the UPM thing, I got all the cases, right? So now I want to know, well, what's the scale here? What are the patterns? Maybe there's some clues in the data about, calls for notice and ordinance. I'd like to kind of unpack some of that similarly. So if there's data that I think we should think about, like what we should request. I also have a sidebar conversation, question about the police. Tim or anybody, do you guys know how, we keep talking about our own police force, but there's 4 agencies that police New Paltz, 3 in addition to the town police. And I don't know like how that works. And maybe this is a question we can ask at the joint meeting. I mean, I feel like this is like under that like police 101. I hope, this new process that the town is probably going to announce soon because of the mandate, the police 101 questions will come up, but can like the state troopers, did they just come whenever they want to? Did they come when asked? Can they be told not to come unless asked? Like, how does that relationship work with the state troopers and the sheriff? Like, if you live in Gardner, you don't have a town of Gardner police. So I assume that the state troopers are just your police, right?
So
I don't understand. Oh, do you know?
I don't know completely, but this is actually what you just said was something that I didn't say in explaining kind of my whole approach to this, because based on like what I have been able to uncover regarding like jurisdictions, like who can respond to like what of our many different layers of police, that is why when I started looking at our whole inventory, I was like looking at police enforcement, thinking of all 4 layers, so we know our chief, like we could talk to him and decriminalize things and talk enforcement all day long, but who do we even know at the state trooper level? Like that's not a face that is familiar to any of us, and like just so that's basically the background of where I was thinking. There's all these different layers of police that could get called to enforce these village specific laws, and like just looking at it from that, because sorry.
Right. I mean, that's why I didn't even realize when it happened that's why I thought of it. I thought of it because I was talking about enforcement, and we can only have those conversations with our police chief. I don't, we have to take the law off the books in order for those other agencies to not enforce it.
Yeah,
I feel like the question that KT asked when we were brainstorming earlier today on this topic was, does a community like Gardner, do they have to pay for not having a police department and relying on the state police department? Like, what if New Paltz didn't have a police department at all? How does that relationship with the state police department? Like, what does that look like? And then, what if there was a situation where New Paltz's police department, approach things very differently, where they didn't carry any weapons at all, but sometimes there are violent crimes where police with weapons are probably needed. Fortunately, it probably doesn't happen too often in New Paltz, but periodically, there could be an armed robbery or a domestic violence situation, that would merit police with weapons. So if our police department didn't have the weapons that they currently have, and we were relying on the state police department, how would that work? Or could that even work?
Those are really good questions.
So wait, did you just say if our cops didn't have weapons, and we rely on those other agencies for the more violent crimes? Is that what you were getting at?
Yep. Well, I think that's the argument, is that there aren't that many violent crimes, but there are some. So when those do occur, how would they be addressed? And I guess, the pushback that you could hear is like, if the police don't have weapons, would we be inviting more violent crimes because we'd be a more vulnerable community? Like, that would be the pro making sure police have weapons argument. We know that would be the counter to suggesting that police could perform their duties and maintain the community that we want, but without having a weapon.
So that also speaks to one of the questions that I asked at the town's forum last week, that I'm like really excited to get the answer to, because I think that would help this, asking about state funding and shared services between state and New Paltz, county and New Paltz, and if there is any with SUNY and New Paltz, because I guess that's the other way to look at the same question. So whenever they get the transcript and I have that answer, it'll also help us figure this out. I like shared services, we could do more of it in terms of, community enjoyment and safety.
Well, when you said shared services, I thought you were going to discuss more of like a county-wide PD as opposed to individual communities having their own, which, that's a conversation that we've had with.
Yeah.
Right. That's a conversation that we've had with the New Paltz Police Department. Would a community like New Paltz actually benefit from that? Because we probably have more police activity than a community, the communities that don't have universities and nightlife. Like, that might be the reason why a community without a university and nightlife would object to that. But then New Paltz would say, yes, we like the idea of a county-wide department.
I just really like that we're framing the discussion more of like, how do we create a more just New Paltz? And that is not just about police.
Yeah, I think it's and maybe it is, maybe a good first step is just looking at some of the local laws, and if they did not exist, would that help with the decriminalization of just some of these things that lots of people partake in, which shouldn't be considered criminal.
I mean, right now we all walk around with, not we all, but anybody who purchases alcohol to go, like, walks around with something that's not exactly a sealed container. So I mean, we've done all right, I think. Like, I guess we should find out the stats
Well, you know,
during COVID.
the whole take out alcohol thing, I just keep saying there's no way they're ever going to take that back.
But technically, that's
gonna be-
being a pedestrian with an open container, you know?
right. So
So why is that okay?
we walk away from main course with our sangria. Is that an open container in a little juggy thing? Is that what you're saying?
I mean, it's not a sealed container. That's the thrill of it, Katie. I'm breaking a law.
So should we anticipate continuing this conversation at the July 8th meeting?
Please.
Yeah.
I'll try and get some data to throw in this tracker as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I saw
the
that.
town was gonna do written response. Do you know when we hope to see that? Anyone?
I don't know, but I feel like my answers to my questions would be very just so helpful in this because my questions I asked I couldn't find on my own short of foiling. So I hope we get those questions, those answers soon.
It's a big task to have to write out all those responses. I just want to say, because I'm thinking about it now, I don't, I would rather if we don't control our town police. Why would we cut off our town police? Why wouldn't we try to just extricate ourselves from those other agencies? I would prefer to work with, the police that we have and have some control over,
Yeah.
I admit my bias on that one. There were people advocating to get rid of our police. I'm like, no, let's get rid of the other ones.
Or let's update our code to make sure our code is reflective of what we want. So
additionally, yes.
Yeah, thanks for starting the process to inventory what those rules are. And, I think once they're all in one place, then we can take a closer look at, where it might make sense to make some edits. So let's discuss at the next meeting.
Cool. Yeah, I'll keep adding to it. Feel free to do the same.
Okay, so the next agenda item is we have a proposal from our Department of Public Works to do some road work at Academy Street, Water Street, South Side, Pencil Hill, Wirtz Ave, and Harrington. And we have some money that was left over from previous state CHIPS programs. And then there's also some funds from Pave New York and the Extreme Weather Fund. So if you tally up, our allocation that was awarded recently plus money that was previously not used, it works out to $265,000. But in that CHIPS letter, it also says because of COVID, communities should anticipate the potential that you might not receive all of that money. We could end up with a 20% haircut. So I feel very comfortable going ahead with the proposal that our superintendent of public works has put forward, where we would, we have a quote to do $102,000 worth of road work at the streets that I just identified. And then we would go ahead and pursue reimbursement through those 3 state programs that would, help us update those roads. And those are not the only streets in New Paltz that we would be looking to get repaired or resurfaced. There are a few other projects, like one we're in the midst of doing a sewer project. There's a few roads that would end up with new top coats, and the same thing with the upcoming new water main project that we'll be doing. So I actually have a more comprehensive list that includes these streets, plus a couple of streets related to the sewer project and a couple of streets related to the water project that, I think it's very reasonable to assume that they could all be done in the next year or so. So I'd like to make a motion that we go ahead and approve the Department of Public Works plan to tackle these 6 streets that Blue identified in his memo.
Second.
second.
Bill
Okay.
seconded it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great. And I'd like to motion that we move bills and claims.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And then the Oliver House conversation we had earlier when we chatted with new HPC member Chris Owens. And then do we have any updates from the planning board? And we don't have Michelle here tonight, so we will not have a ZBA update. But Bill, do you want to comment on anything planning board related?
No updates.
Okay. Then I don't have anything else unless you guys have stuff.
No, but this was like a great meeting.
Yeah, we have some super difficult topics, but we had reasonable conversations. But these are not easy things to figure out. Like the maths gathering process, and how we make sure that we protect First Amendment rights. That's why I was saying before, this feels like it's above my pay grade. Like I'm no constitutional attorney. And then figuring out how we have more reasonable laws that don't criminalize lots of stuff that people partake in on a regular basis. How do we have and I feel like we have the right folks in our police department who want to take a harder look. So I think we're lucky with our current chief, and he's very willing to have these difficult conversations. So we'll keep pushing.
Do you guys see this chat?
I was looking at it. I was trying to see if there were any questions in it. Because I didn't want to disregard questions. It seems to be something way at the top about
I can't
garden
follow
for
it.
nutrition.
Here, I'm reposting all of the questions. The question part.
I don't know. Can you answer? I don't know if this.
I mean, there's a question here about does an individual within our community have special privileges? Does he pay the Department of Public Works for special access to the service road? We don't have any unique relationships like that with anyone in the community. The service road to get to Gardens for Nutrition or to the parking area off Huguenot Street, it's all publicly available situations. And then it seems like there's a question about, whether, how trash is handled. We say this all the time, like when people, if they feel like something has happened, if they feel like, trash needs to be picked up at the Gardens for Nutrition or near the sewer plant, call our Department of Public Works, 255-1980, call our building department, at 255-3055. That's how we can address specific situations in a timely fashion. It's really hard when, folks identify like a general concern unless we have details. And we're in no way looking to out or identify individuals. We just want to solve problems, and the best way we can do that is if we know exactly what the problem is, and maybe it's a public works matter, maybe it's a building department matter, And then we can go ahead and figure out the most responsible course of action.
Thank you for answering that, Tim.
Okay, I don't have anything else this evening.
I'm gonna move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.